Vitals are dropping. Push harder.
On it, epinephrine, 1 milligram.
Please save her!
Bag's ready, keep going.
That caregiver killed our mother. That was her plan all along.
Oh my God.
We have to do something.
She had everything, a $47 million estate, 3 adult children, and grandchildren. But when Eleanor Hartwell's will was read, nobody expected this. Her entire fortune, every penny, went to someone her family had never met before. Someone who had worked in her home for just 3 years. The children were furious. The lawyers were baffled. And soon, the family accused the caregiver of something darker than theft: murder. This is the story of a billionaire, a caregiver, and a family torn apart by greed, suspicion, and a secret that almost died with Eleanor herself. Before we get to the shocking will reading, you need to understand the players in this story. Eleanor Hartwell, widow, grandmother, philanthropist. By 2018, she was worth nearly $50 million. Her fortune came from her late husband's tech company. She was 74 years old. Then there's the caregiver, Marina Vasquez, 32 years old, originally from Mexico. She arrived at Eleanor's home in March 2019, hired through a private care agency. And the family, 3 adult children who grew up expecting a substantial inheritance. David, the oldest, Margaret, the middle child, and Thomas, the youngest, who was struggling financially and had even borrowed money from his mother. But here's where the story gets interesting. Just 3 years after Marina arrived, Eleanor died. The official cause, natural causes, heart failure. She was 77 years old. The family mourned. But when the will was read, everything changed. And here the rumors and questions came flying. Question 1. Why would Eleanor leave her entire $47 million fortune to a woman she'd only known for 3 years? Question 2. Did Marina manipulate an elderly woman into changing her will? And the one nobody wanted to ask was, did Eleanor's death happen the way the doctors said it did? By the end of this story, one family would accuse Marina of elder abuse, fraud, and murder. And Marina would have no defense except the truth. To understand what happened to Eleanor, you first have to understand who Eleanor was. Born in 1945 in Portland, Oregon, Eleanor Hartwell grew up in a middle-class home. Her father was a banker, her mother a homemaker. By all accounts, she was a quiet, intelligent child, shy even. In 1967, she married Richard Hartwell, a young engineer with big dreams. Richard had a vision. He wanted to build software solutions for Fortune 500 companies. Eleanor supported him. She raised 3 children while Richard worked 80-hour weeks. And in 1989, Richard's company went public. Overnight, they were millionaires. By the late 90s, they were billionaires. But here's the thing about Eleanor that matters to this story. Richard died in 2010. She was left alone with a massive fortune and no one to share it with. Her children had their own lives. Margaret was a lawyer in Boston. David was a banker in New York. Thomas lived in Seattle working in tech, or at least he said he was. Eleanor had grandchildren, yes, but they were distant, busy with their own lives. And Eleanor was lonely. After Richard died, Eleanor spent most of her time in the house she and Richard had built together. It was a 15,000 square foot mansion in the Pacific Palisades area of California. 12 rooms, ocean views. But a house is just a building when you're alone in it. Eleanor suffered from arthritis. Her knees got worse every year. By 2018, she could barely walk without pain. She also had early-stage cognitive issues, nothing diagnosed officially, but her doctor noted she was becoming forgetful and confused at times. In March 2019, Eleanor's assistant suggested she hire a live-in caregiver. Eleanor agreed. She had no idea this decision would tear her family apart. Marina Vasquez was born in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1987. She immigrated to the United States in 2005 at age 18, seeking opportunity. By 2019, she had built a modest life in Los Angeles. She worked at a private care agency, one of the most reputable in Southern California. Her job was to assess elderly patients and match them with caregivers. Marina herself was not a caregiver initially. She worked in the office. But in early 2019, the agency faced a shortage. One of their best caregivers quit. Marina volunteered to take on the job herself. She was paid $3,500 a month. That was it. According to her former coworkers, Marina was good at her job. She was patient, kind. She spoke Spanish and English. She had a way of making elderly clients feel comfortable. On March 15, 2019, Marina walked into Eleanor Hartwell's mansion for the first time. According to Marina's later testimony, Eleanor was immediately warm and welcoming. She told me to call her Eleanor, not Mrs. Hartwell, Marina would later recall. Most of my clients insisted on formality. But Eleanor, she wanted to be friends, And that is where the controversy begins. Because everyone, the family, the lawyers, the prosecutors, would later ask, was Marina being genuine? Or was this the beginning of a calculated manipulation? For the first 6 months, Marina was simply doing her job. She helped Eleanor with medication. She cooked her meals. She assisted with physical therapy for her arthritis. But something was shifting. In Eleanor's journal, later entered as evidence, she began writing more frequently about Marina. Marina made me laugh today. We watched old movies and she stayed late to keep me company. She doesn't have to do that, but she does. I've known my own children longer than I've known Marina. But sometimes I feel like I know her better. On the 9th month, Eleanor had hired Marina as a live-in caregiver exclusively. She increased her salary to $6,000 a month, a significant raise. Marina also received benefits, health insurance, a car allowance, her own suite in the mansion. The family noticed the change immediately. David called his mother to ask why she was wasting money on an expensive caregiver. Eleanor's response? Because Marina makes me happy. And at my age, happiness matters. But privately, David was asking another question. What is this woman really after? And that's when the family's suspicions began to grow. Not because they noticed anything sinister, but because they noticed Eleanor pulling away from them and closer to Marina. By late 2020, Eleanor was fully dependent on Marina, not just physically, emotionally. Marina was the one who took Eleanor to doctor's appointments. Marina was the one who managed her medications. Marina was the one who controlled who visited Eleanor, when, and for how long. And Eleanor's cognitive decline, the forgetfulness her doctors had noted, was getting worse. In November 2020, Eleanor's lawyer, Robert Chen, noticed something concerning. Eleanor called him out of the blue and asked to update her will. This wasn't unusual, but the request was unusual. Eleanor wanted to add Marina as a beneficiary, a minor one at first, just $250,000. Robert asked if Eleanor was sure. He mentioned her children. Eleanor's response was immediate and sharp. My will is my business, Robert. Not yours, not my children's. Marina has been more of a daughter to me than my actual daughters have been. I want her to be taken care of. Robert made a note of the conversation, but he processed the change. It was Eleanor's money. It was her right. But it was the beginning of something darker, a pattern that would escalate over the next 18 months. A series of changes to her will, each one increasing Marina's share, each one reducing her children's inheritance, and each one raising the question, was Eleanor making these decisions freely, or was she being coerced? By the time Eleanor Hartwell died in March 2022, Marina Vasquez was the sole beneficiary of a $47 million estate. Eleanor's 3 children would inherit nothing but suspicion, anger, and a determination to prove that Marina had stolen their mother's fortune, and possibly her life. March 2022. Eleanor was 77 years old. Her health had been declining for months. Her arthritis was severe. She was on multiple medications for heart issues, high blood pressure, and anxiety. In her final weeks, Eleanor rarely left the house. She spent most of her time in her bedroom or the sitting room downstairs. Marina was her constant companion. According to Marina's account, the only account from inside the home. Eleanor's final days were marked by pain, confusion, and increasing medical episodes. She would have moments of clarity, Marina would later testify. And then she would seem confused. She would forget where she was. She called me by her daughter's name sometimes. On March 10, 2022, Eleanor had a bad fall in the bathroom. She hit her head. Marina called an ambulance immediately. The ER doctor found a minor concussion, some bruising. Eleanor was held overnight for observation but released the next morning. The doctor noted in her chart, patient is cognitively impaired. Lives with caregiver. Advised fall prevention measures. Eleanor went home with Marina, and that's when things took a turn. Over the next 48 hours, Marina called the doctor 3 times. First call, Eleanor is having chest pain. Doctor prescribed pain medication and advised monitoring. Second call, she's having trouble breathing. Doctor recommended she be taken to the ER if symptoms worsened. Third call, March 12, 2022, 11:47 p.m. I think you need to come. I think she's dying. The paramedics arrived at 11:58 p.m. Eleanor Hartwell was found in her bed, unconscious. She was in full cardiac arrest. Eleanor Hartwell was pronounced dead at 12:47 a.m. on March 13, 2022. The official cause of death, according to the medical examiner, acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, natural causes. She had been on cardiac medication. She had a history of heart issues. At 77 years old with her medical history, a heart attack was not a shock. Her death certificate was signed. The case was closed. But the family was not satisfied. On the morning of the will reading 3 weeks later, David Hartwell learned that his mother's entire estate had gone to Marina Vasquez. His reaction was immediate. "This is impossible," he said, according to his lawyer. "My mother would never do this. That woman did something to her, and here's where reasonable suspicion becomes something darker. What if David was right? Consider the facts from a different angle. Marina had exclusive access to Eleanor during her final weeks. Marina was the one administering Eleanor's medications. Marina was the one making the calls to the doctor. Marina was the one who found Eleanor in cardiac arrest. And Marina had every motive, a $47 million inheritance. The family hired a private investigator. What they found raised serious questions. First, Eleanor's medications. She was prescribed a heart medication called Digitalis, a powerful drug. High doses of Digitalis can cause cardiac arrhythmias, irregular heartbeats that can lead to a heart attack. The question, could Marina have increased Eleanor's dosage deliberately? Second, the timing. Eleanor had been stable for months. Then, suddenly 3 major medical events in 48 hours, followed by a fatal heart attack. One of the family's consultants suggested the pattern was suspicious. Third, Marina's behavior after the death. According to multiple sources, Marina seemed unusually calm. One nurse who visited after Eleanor's death said, "Most caregivers are devastated when a patient dies." Marina was almost businesslike. But here's the problem. These are all circumstantial observations, no hard evidence, no proof. Just a family's desperate need to explain how their mother's fortune could have gone to a woman they barely knew. The medical examiner saw no signs of foul play. The paramedics found no evidence of poisoning. The autopsy was routine. Eleanor Hartwell had died of a heart attack. Or had she? The real question was, would anyone ever know for sure? 6 weeks after Eleanor's death, David Hartwell filed a lawsuit. He accused Marina Vasquez of 1. Elder abuse, 2. Undue influence, 3. Fraud. His claim: Marina had deliberately manipulated his mother, both mentally and medically, to gain control of her finances and ultimately her entire estate. The lawsuit also included a criminal referral to the district attorney, asking them to investigate whether Marina had poisoned Eleanor. Marina hired a lawyer, and Marina's defense was simple and unwavering. "I loved Eleanor. I took care of her. I did nothing wrong. I did not force her to change her will. I did not harm her. And I will not apologize for being the person she chose to love." The problem was, nobody knew who was telling the truth. Eleanor was dead. She couldn't testify. All that remained were documents, testimony, and suspicion. The case would spend the next 2 years in discovery. Lawyers on both sides fighting over depositions, medical records, and Marina's background. And what they uncovered would shock everyone involved. As the civil case dragged on, the family pushed for a criminal investigation. They wanted answers. "Our mother did not die of natural causes," David insisted. "That woman killed her. We just have to prove it." But the prosecution had a problem. The medical examiner had already signed off on the death as natural causes. There was no toxicology report, no autopsy findings of foul play, no physical evidence of poisoning. To reopen the case, they would need new evidence. And new evidence is not easy to find when the body has already been cremated.
Yes.
Eleanor's body had been cremated by Marina 3 days after Eleanor's death, before the family could request an independent autopsy. Marina claimed it was following Eleanor's wishes, that Eleanor wanted to be cremated. But the family had no documentation of this wish, and Marina had no witnesses who could confirm it. It was, in the eyes of the family, the perfect crime. Get rid of the evidence. Claim the victim wanted it. Inherit the fortune. But was it a crime, or was it a misunderstanding? A grief-stricken woman following the only instructions she could remember? As we enter the investigation phase of this story, you need to understand this. Someone is lying. The question is, who? The lawsuit against Marina Vasquez went to discovery in August 2022. This is where things get interesting. When attorneys began digging into Marina's background and Eleanor's medical records, they found something unexpected. A pattern. Marina had worked as a caregiver for 17 elderly clients over the span of 8 years. 17 clients. And 13 of them had significantly changed their wills in her favor. 13. The prosecutor's eyes lit up. "This is it," they said. "This is the pattern. This is proof of a con artist." But wait, the defense had an answer. Of those 13 clients who changed their wills, 12 of them were still alive. 12 of them testified under oath that they had changed their wills willingly, that they loved Marina, that she had cared for them selflessly, that they wanted to thank her. One client, an 81-year-old man named Harold Feynman, said in his deposition, "Marina saved my life. After my wife died, I was ready to die. Marina came into my home and gave me a reason to live. Leaving her money in my will is the least I can do." So was Marina a con artist? Or was she genuinely excellent at her job? Did elderly clients happen to love her more than their own families? Or was she systematically grooming them? The evidence was ambiguous. And the jury, they would have to decide what they believed. Then the defense made a move. They requested Marina's phone records and text messages. What they found was shocking, but not in the way the family expected. There were hundreds of text exchanges between Marina and Eleanor, and they were intimate, loving, real. "Good morning, my sweetheart. I made your favorite coffee. Thank you for being my guardian angel. I am so lucky to have you in my life." The messages were dated over 3 years. They showed a genuine relationship, and crucially, they showed Eleanor making decisions about the will on her own. In one text, Eleanor wrote, "I called Robert and told him to change the will again. You deserve more. You deserve everything." Marina's response, "No, Eleanor, you shouldn't have done that. Your children need to be taken care of too." The message painted Marina as someone who had actually resisted taking more from Eleanor, not someone who was pushing for it. The family's lawyer was shaken. That text, he would later admit, was the moment we realized our entire theory might be wrong. But it wasn't enough to admit defeat. Not yet. The family's team dug deeper. They wanted to find something, anything, that would prove Marina was a predator. And they did find some things. Marina had a difficult childhood. Born in poverty in Guadalajara, her father was absent. Her mother worked multiple jobs. Marina was raised largely by her grandmother, a woman named Rosa. Rosa was kind to her. But Rosa died when Marina was 15. It was Marina's first major loss. According to Marina's own testimony, she became obsessed with caregiving after her grandmother's death. She wanted to make sure no elderly person would feel as alone as she had felt. Is this the origin story of a serial con artist? Or is it the origin story of someone genuinely driven to care for the elderly? The prosecutors found financial records showing Marina had sent money to her family in Mexico for years, thousands of dollars, even before she became a caregiver. They found letters, handwritten letters, from elderly clients she had cared for years ago, thanking her, calling her an angel, saying she had saved their lives. And here's what was crucial. These letters were from clients she had not inherited money from. She had cared for them, changed their lives, and received nothing in return. So why? Why would someone do that if they were a con artist? A true sociopath wouldn't care for people unless there was profit. But Marina's pattern suggested otherwise. The family's investigator, a seasoned detective named Michael Torres, began to have doubts. "I've worked crime for 30 years, he told his supervisors. "And I'm not seeing the signs of a predator here. I'm seeing a good person in a complicated situation." That's not what the family wanted to hear. And it's not what the prosecution wanted to hear either. But it's what the evidence was beginning to suggest. By this point in the case, late 2023, nearly 2 years after Eleanor's death, the narrative was starting to crack. The family's case for murder was crumbling. The evidence of undue influence was ambiguous at best. And Marina's character was starting to look human. Flawed, perhaps, but human. In December 2023, the prosecution thought they found their smoking gun. A nurse who had visited Eleanor in February 2022, about a month before her death, came forward with a new testimony. She claimed that she had seen Marina handling Eleanor's medications in an unusual way. The prosecutor was excited. But when they pressed for details, the nurse's story fell apart. "Unusual how?" they asked. The nurse was vague. "Just, I don't know. She seemed secretive about it." "Do you have evidence she was giving Eleanor the wrong medication?" "No. But I had a feeling. A feeling. That's not evidence. That's suspicion. And in a court of law, suspicion is not enough." Then in January 2024, another development. A toxicology lab offered to conduct a retrospective analysis on Eleanor's remains, the cremated ashes. If digitalis or any other poison was in her system, they might be able to detect traces. The family was hopeful. Marina's lawyer was terrified. But the lab's results, when they came back, were inconclusive. The cremation process had degraded the remains too much. No poison could be detected, but also no clean bill of health could be given. It was nothing. And nothing is what the case became. Nothing but questions, nothing but suspicion, nothing but pain. The family wanted answers, but the evidence wasn't giving them any. By spring 2024, the prosecution made a decision. They would not pursue criminal charges against Marina Vasquez. The evidence simply wasn't there. Eleanor had died of a heart attack. There was nothing, no hard evidence, no confession, no smoking gun, that suggested it was anything else. The civil lawsuit continued, but the criminal investigation was closed. Here's what happened next, and it's crucial to understanding this story. The family stopped asking, "Did Marina kill Eleanor?" and started asking a different question. Did Marina unduly influence Eleanor to change her will? This is a lower legal bar. You don't need to prove murder. You don't need to prove poisoning. You just need to prove that Marina used her position of power and trust to manipulate Eleanor into making decisions Eleanor wouldn't have otherwise made. And here's the thing, there was actually some evidence of that. Eleanor's cognitive decline was documented. Eleanor's dependence on Marina was absolute. And Eleanor's will changes were suspiciously timed to when Marina's influence was greatest. But the counter-evidence was also compelling. Eleanor's own words in her own handwriting saying she loved Marina. Eleanor's own words in text messages saying Marina deserved the money. Eleanor's own actions, calling her lawyer and instructing him to change the will. Could Eleanor have been unduly influenced? Absolutely. Or could Eleanor have been a lonely widow who found genuine love and wanted to express her gratitude? Also, absolutely. The jury would have to decide which story was true, and that's where the case sits, even now. In May 2024, after 2 years of litigation, the case was settled. Marina and the family reached an agreement outside of court. The exact terms were confidential, but according to sources close to the case, the family received about $8 million. Marina kept approximately $39 million. Was it justice? Depends on whether Marina did something wrong in the first place. If she unduly influenced Eleanor, Marina got away with a crime. If she truly loved Eleanor and Eleanor loved her back, the family got a partial payback for their grief and suspicion, and Marina got to keep the life Eleanor had given her. The truth? The truth was probably somewhere in between. Eleanor was lonely. Marina was kind. Eleanor was vulnerable. Marina was protective, but perhaps too protective. Eleanor was easily influenced. Marina was influential. Was it a con or was it love? The evidence suggests it was both, and that's what made this case so heartbreaking. Because in the real world, human motivations are messy. People are not purely good or purely evil. They are complicated, contradictory, real, and the truth is, we may never fully know what happened behind closed doors in that mansion. But we can know this. A woman is dead, a family is fractured, a caregiver's reputation is tarnished forever. And the money, that vast fortune that Eleanor built her life around, changed hands and changed nothing. Because you can't buy love with money, and you can't buy back time with a mother after she's gone. That's the real tragedy of this story, not the mystery of the will, but the mystery of loneliness, and what we'll do to escape it. But here's what changed the case, and this is where the story gets personal. The civil trial, one piece of evidence was introduced that had been buried in Eleanor's personal files. A letter, written in Eleanor's own hand, dated November 2021, 4 months before her death. The family's lawyers found it while going through Eleanor's desk. They almost didn't include it in discovery, because at first they thought it would hurt their case. But their ethics, their legal obligation, forced them to reveal it. The letter was addressed to my dear children, and it said, "My darling David, Margaret, and Thomas, if you're reading this, then I'm likely gone. I know you will be angry about my will. I know you will blame Marina. But I need you to understand something before you judge me. I did not change my will because Marina manipulated me. I changed it because I finally understood what matters in life. And you three, you stopped mattering a long time ago. When your father died, I waited for you to call. You didn't. When I fell and broke my hip, I called each of you. Margaret sent flowers. David sent his lawyer to review my finances. I could hear the disappointment in his voice when he realized I wasn't yet incapacitated enough to require a guardianship. Thomas didn't even call. And yet Marina, a woman I met when I was old and broken, treated me like I was worthy of love. She didn't want my money. She wanted me. For the first time in 12 years, I felt like a human being instead of a bank account. I don't expect you to understand. But I am telling you, the decision to give Marina my estate was not coercion. It was the first truly free decision I've made since your father died. Marina did not push me toward this. If anything, she resisted it. She told me to think of you. But I made the choice, and I made it with clarity. I chose love over blood, and I regret nothing. Love Eleanor. The courtroom fell silent. The judge had to call for order because the family was sobbing. The prosecution sat in shocked silence. Marina's lawyer looked at Marina, and Marina was crying too. After the letter was revealed, the case changed, not legally. The law doesn't care about emotional letters, But morally, spiritually, everything shifted. David Hartwell requested a meeting with Marina outside the courthouse. In a small room with just their lawyers, they sat across from each other for the first time since Eleanor's death. What David said, according to Marina's lawyer, was this: "I'm sorry. My mother was lonely, and I wasn't there for her. That's on me. That's on all of us. You were there. You gave her something we couldn't or weren't willing to give her. I don't know if I forgive you for how things happened, but I understand now, and I'm sorry." Marina broke down. "I never wanted to hurt your family," she said through tears. "I loved your mother. I truly did, and I never told her to change her will. Ever, the money doesn't matter to me. I just wanted her to know she was loved." And that, more than any verdict, was the moment the case was truly resolved. Because in that room, two people finally acknowledged the truth. Eleanor had been lonely. Eleanor had chosen Marina. And Eleanor's children, for all their questions and suspicions, had simply not been there. The money was a symptom of that absence, not the cause. Margaret, the middle daughter, was harder to convince. She maintained that Eleanor had been taken advantage of, regardless of what Eleanor said in the letter. Vulnerable people can't consent to major decisions, Margaret argued. But even she eventually accepted the settlement, because accepting it meant accepting that her mother had loved Marina. And that was harder than accepting that Marina was a con artist. Thomas, the youngest, didn't even appear at the settlement discussions. He was too ashamed. Because of the three children, Thomas had been the most financially dependent on his mother. He had borrowed money from her repeatedly. And when Eleanor saw that her eldest son was thriving, her middle daughter was successful, but her youngest was struggling, she made a choice. "Let him find his own way," she apparently told Marina. "I've rescued him enough." Thomas felt that rejection keenly. After the settlement, he left California. No one has heard from him since. The family, in the end, was the one fractured, not by Marina, but by Eleanor's death and the uncomfortable truths it revealed. After the settlement in May 2024, Marina Vasquez kept the home, Eleanor's home, the mansion in the Pacific Palisades. She sold it 6 months later. She bought a smaller house, nothing extravagant. She established a foundation in Eleanor's name, the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation for Elderly Care. To date, it has funded 7 caregiving scholarships. 7 young people are now trained in elder care because of Eleanor's money and Marina's commitment. Is that evidence of a good person? Or a very clever con artist covering her tracks? Judge for yourself. Marina gave an interview about a year after the settlement. In it, she said, "I loved Eleanor. I still love her. That hasn't changed. Money doesn't change that. A lawsuit doesn't change that. I know her family thinks I took advantage of her. Maybe they're right. Or maybe I just saw a person who needed love, and I gave her love. And she gave me a home. She gave me a family. Even if that family is now broken, I don't regret it." When asked if she would do anything differently, Marina's answer was surprising. "No, if I could go back, I would do exactly the same thing. Because Eleanor deserved to be loved. And she was." And that perhaps is the final piece of this puzzle. Because the question isn't whether Marina was right or wrong. The question is, what does it mean to love? Is love when you're there from birth, through blood, through obligation? Or is love when you show up for someone in their loneliness and make them feel wanted? Eleanor chose the latter. And she paid the price for that choice, as did her family, as did Marina. The will was never overturned. Marina kept the money. The family accepted the settlement. Eleanor was cremated, the ashes scattered, and the love that tied them all together was severed, but not forgotten. Because love, real or manipulated, genuine or calculated, changes people. And it changed everyone in this story. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it ends somewhere you won't expect. In March 2025, exactly 3 years after Eleanor's death, the Los Angeles Times published an investigation. A journalist named Patricia Gould had been following the case, and she made a discovery that nobody had made before. She was interviewing people in Eleanor's life, doctors, neighbors, friends. And one of Eleanor's closest friends, a woman named Joan Chen, who had known Eleanor for 40 years, mentioned something in passing. "You know, Eleanor used to call me every single day," Joan said. "Before Marina arrived, she would call me and we'd talk for hours. Then one day, I didn't hear from her. For 6 months, I didn't hear from her." "Did you try calling?" the journalist asked. "I did. But Marina kept saying Eleanor was sleeping, or busy, or not feeling well. After a while, I stopped trying." The journalist smelled a story. She began reaching out to other members of Eleanor's social circle. The same pattern emerged again and again. Eleanor's friends, people she'd known for decades, had been slowly cut off from her life. not dramatically, just gradually. Excuses here, missed calls there, until the relationship simply faded. Now, was this Marina doing this deliberately? Or was it the natural result of Eleanor being ill and homebound? The journalist dug deeper. She obtained Eleanor's phone records. From 2019 to 2022, Eleanor's phone calls decreased dramatically. In 2019, before Marina arrived, Eleanor made an average of 15 phone calls a day. By 2022, the month before her death, Eleanor made 0 phone calls. 0. The only incoming calls were from doctors and Marina. The only outgoing calls were from Marina, using Eleanor's phone to talk to family members. This is classic isolation, the journalist wrote. Whether intentional or not, Eleanor was completely isolated by the time she died. And isolation is a form of elder abuse, even if no one intended it to be. Even if it happened gradually without malice, it's still abuse. So the question the journalist posed in her article was this: was Marina guilty of elder abuse? Perhaps. But perhaps the real guilty party was the family. The family that left Eleanor so alone that she was vulnerable to becoming isolated in the first place. The article went viral. It was shared 400,000 times. And suddenly, people who had accepted the settlement were questioning their judgment again. Here's what happened after the article was published. Marina's foundation lost 2 major donors. People who had sided with Marina suddenly felt uneasy. Maybe she didn't deliberately isolate Eleanor. But the isolation happened. And Eleanor, in her vulnerable state, became completely dependent on Marina. That's the definition of a coercive relationship. Eleanor's son David gave a statement. I read this article and I realized something I hadn't before. Yes, my mother was lonely. Yes, we should have called more often. But that doesn't mean this woman's actions toward our mother were right. Even if she didn't mean to harm her, she did. Harm doesn't require intent, it requires only effect. And he was right. Marina didn't need to be an evil con artist for her actions to have been harmful. She could be a good person who happened to isolate her charge. She could love Eleanor genuinely and be guilty of elder abuse. These things are not mutually exclusive. And that's what makes this case so maddening. Because there are no villains here. Only people. Eleanor, lonely, vulnerable, desperate for love. Marina, kind, attentive, but ultimately too controlling. The family, absent, self-absorbed, but ultimately grieving. All of them are right. All of them are wrong. And none of them could have done it differently. Because to be human is to be flawed. Marina gave another interview in response to the Times article. And for the first time, she admitted something. I didn't realize how much I was isolating Eleanor. I thought I was protecting her. Her family wasn't visiting. Her friends weren't helpful. I thought if I was her everything, then she would never feel alone. But in making her world smaller, I made her more vulnerable. Not stronger, more vulnerable. If I could do it differently, I would encourage her to maintain her friendships, even if her children disappointed her. Even if her friends didn't call often enough, because isolation is a slow death, and I didn't mean to do that to her. But I did. That admission didn't undo the harm, it didn't change the outcome. But it did something important. It made the story human again. Instead of a tale of good versus evil, it became a story about the tragedy of human complexity, about how good intentions can lead to harmful outcomes, about how love and control are sometimes 2 sides of the same coin, and about how a family fractured by suspicion could never be repaired. So here we are, 3 years after Eleanor died. All the legal cases are settled. All the headlines have faded. Marina still has most of the money. The family accepted their settlement. And Eleanor? Eleanor is in the ground, or scattered on the wind. But Eleanor is also in the scholarship foundation bearing her name. She's in the young caregivers she's trained. She's in the work Marina continues to do with the elderly. So was Eleanor's life a tragedy? Yes and no. She was lonely, she was vulnerable, she was manipulated, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But in her final years, she was also loved. She was also wanted, she was also seen. And for an elderly person, that is everything. So the question I want to leave you with, the question that will haunt you long after this video ends, is this. If you were in Eleanor's position, lonely and aging and desperate for connection, would you have done anything differently? Would you have been smarter? More cautious, or would you have fallen for Marina too? Because the truth about this case, the uncomfortable real truth, is that Eleanor's choice wasn't wrong. It was human, and humanity is messy, and sometimes love and manipulation look exactly the same, from the inside. So before you judge Marina, or Eleanor's family, or Eleanor herself, ask yourself this question: who am I willing to trust? And what would I be willing to give up for genuine human connection? Because in a world of isolation and loneliness, those are the real questions. Not whether someone got an inheritance they didn't deserve, but whether all of us, deserve to be loved. Eleanor Hartwell was. For 3 years at least, she was loved. And that's more than many of us will ever have. Thank you for watching this story. I know it's heavy. I know it's complex. And I know, like me, you probably still can't decide if Marina was a saint or a con artist. And maybe that's the point. In real life, people are complicated. So here's what I want you to do. In the comments below, I want you to answer this question. If you were Eleanor, would you have left your money to Marina? And more importantly, if you were one of Eleanor's children, what would you have done differently? Not to judge them, but to understand yourself. Because these questions matter. They matter because loneliness is epidemic, because elder isolation is a real problem in America, and because many of you watching this probably know an elderly person who is as alone as Eleanor was. So share this video with them, or with someone you know who is getting older, because we need to talk about this, as a society, as family, as humans, because no one deserves to be as lonely as Eleanor Hartwell was. And if Marina's only crime was showing up when everyone else had disappeared, well, that says more about us than it does about her. If you like this story, subscribe. There are more cases like this, stories about money, family, manipulation, and the question of what we owe each other. Like the case of the billionaire who cut off his entire family in his will to marry a woman half his age. Or the story of the caretaker who convinced a millionaire to adopt her as his daughter. Each of these stories will force you to question your own assumptions, and that's the whole point. So subscribe, and join us for the next case. Thank you for watching.